Welcome to Type Tune Tint. I'm Tom Kranz. For 25 years, Deric Gilliard, a career civil rights advocate and journalist, served America as a communications professional in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. He served under 5 presidents. Can you guess which one inspired his memoir, The Longest 4 Years of My Life? Alternative facts, multiple efforts to pull the plug on Obamacare, and the slow, contentious response to the COVID pandemic are your clues. And I'm joined by Deric Gilliard from his palatial estate in Stone Mountain, Georgia. And I'm in my palatial estate here in lovely Fanwood, New Jersey. Deric, it's great to meet you. Thank you and good morning.
Good morning.
We are here to talk about, if we were just to talk about Deric's resume and things he's done, that's a 2-hour episode right there. So let me just stipulate that Deric has a huge CV. We're going to get into some of it. But I was attracted to you as a guest for 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is you have a background as a journalist. You actually got a degree in journalism, your undergraduate. My degree was in communications with a kind of a minor in journalism, and I've been a journalist pretty much my whole career until I left that world in 2007. And you're a self-published author, and I will always have a soft spot in my heart for self-published authors because we do it for the love, not necessarily for fame and glory and riches. But the second reason we're here is the book, your recent book, The Longest 4 Years of My Life. Deric is a veteran of 25 years of working for the federal government under 5 different administrations. Those of you who are watching and listening, I'll let you figure out which were the longest 4 years of his life, but we'll get into that. Might not take all that much cogitation, actually. But first of all, Deric, let's get into a little bit of your background. So you also have an earlier book that you wrote called Living in the Shadows of a Legend, Unsung Heroes and Sheroes Who Marched with Dr. Martin Luther King. And this is a memoir of your time with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was Dr. King's group. So you did that before you were in government. Tell us about how you started and was that the first job you had out of college, or how did you get started basically doing that?
Yeah, no, as you mentioned, was a career journalist, and I started in Wichita, Kansas at the then Wichita Eagle Beacon. And, that was in the days when you had morning and evening papers. And I was there a year and they killed the evening paper. So that was after I graduated from the University of Kansas in 1977. They have a well-known print journalism school, William Allen White School of Journalism. I was a sports writer down there. So I came back. My mother was ill in Atlanta, came back to Atlanta, thought I had one job, didn't, ended up doing a few different things, but worked for the Atlanta Daily World, which is the oldest Black daily newspaper in the country.
Now, this is after college, I'm assuming?
This is after college,
okay.
Right after my first job in Wichita. And when this evening paper closed, I went down there. That was cool, covered all kind of things like City Hall and crime, and ended up covering the Atlanta missing and murdered children's crisis. So many things down there, the police beat. I also was a stringer. Well, I was a stringer for Time Magazine, and I did that, covered Andy Young patching up potholes in the city of Atlanta. That was kind of cool. I was with USA Today their first 10 years. Now, not as they had a section called Across the Nation, and each state would have a blurb, and I would provide the Georgia blurb to them. So I did that while I did other things. That was kind of on the side. So yeah, those are some of the things that I did, but and started my own communications company for a while. I went into public affairs. I was the public information officer at Clark Atlanta University. And then I went down to Fort Valley State, where I was the director of college and community relations. And then came back and started my own business, mostly working for small companies who needed, PR help, needed somebody to get news releases out and write stories. And but working for yourself, and especially if you have a family, can get to be it's touch and go, right? You gotta, as you said, the money has to come in. And so I was looking to come in and out of the cold, and somebody said, well, the SCLC is looking for the communications director. I went in
Hmm.
there, and Dr. Joseph Lowry hired me right away. He had a need and saw that
Now, what year are we talking here?
that would be 1994.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was a transformative experience for me, because the SCLC is a small organization. After Dr. Abernathy, of course, after Dr. King's assassination in '68, and Dr. Abernathy took over for a little while, and that didn't turn out to be really good. And a lot of people were by that time proclaiming the civil rights movement as dead. It was, you'd accomplished this and that. And so I think Dr. Lowry had other ideas, and he never they saw a microphone he didn't like, and he liked. Well, I won't say that, but
That could be a good thing and a bad thing, I guess,
it
right?
could be a good thing and a bad thing.
Yeah.
But for me, for somebody who then did not have a lot of restrictions, I could be creative. And so, for example, I never called fewer than 100 press conferences a year in the
Wow.
4 years I was at the SCLC, and we did all kind of really cool issues like economic empowerment. For example, he had campaigns called Teacher Dollars Some Sense, because one of the things in the Black community, money tends to leave the Black community really quickly. It's unlike some other communities, maybe the Jewish community, and some other where the money tends to turn over in those communities. We dealt with, of course, things like hate crimes. We dealt with. I was the principal non-Muslim promoter of the Million Man March, and even though we weren't Muslims, we were Christians. The belief was that the strength of the importance of the Black man in the community, in the family, and the community was very important. We dealt with issues like disparities in sentencing. Why do people who get caught with powdered cocaine get 3 to 4 times the sentences as
Sure.
people with, those were some of the kind of issues anyway. And I kept running around the country dealing with all these issues and meeting these fantastic people, most of whom had spent their entire lives in this struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. Most of them had no 401ks, no, many instances, not even health insurance, no retirement. And I started to ask them, I said, well, young people today don't know what you did towards the contributions and the passages of the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act of '65. And they have all these freedoms today. They have all these opportunities to go to school anywhere. They have the grades to get in, to live basically in any community they can afford to live in. They don't have to sit in the back of the bus. I said,
Mm,
and you are in large part to credit for that. And I said, do you resent it? And almost to a person, Tom, they would get very emotional. And they said, the little old lady would grab my arm and she said, no, baby, you don't understand. We were part of the greatest social revolution this
mm,
country's ever had. We tore down the cotton curtain. We called and we challenged America to be what it said it was. And it says we hold these truths to be self-evident,
sure.
right? That all men, and it should have said, and women are created equal, right? With certain innate rights. And I said, wow. I said, okay, these people, and many of them said they were going to write a book. But writing a book is more than a notion, right, Tom? So most of them weren't capable of writing a book, and a few of them did. But I said, listen, you have this training. These people sacrificed so you could go to a really good school. You could, and so I was equipped to do for them what they couldn't do for themselves in many instances, and they had done for me what I probably wouldn't have had the courage to do in many instances. So I started, and every time we travel, I'd say, well, who in Louisville is connected to the SCLC that I should interview while I was here? Who in Birmingham? Who in Los Angeles and Chicago. And so I started doing these interviews and because I never started out thinking about writing a book. And so that's kind of how that book came
So
to
that's what
be.
that book is essentially a compilation of all these people you spoke with over what period of
It's,
time would you say?
uh, I would say so, certainly from 94 to 98. And then I continued to interview them after I left the
Wow.
SCLC.
So that book is the culmination of quite a few years of work
I
and
would say
gathering.
a good, yeah, I would say probably about 8 years, maybe six or
Okay.
eight
Yeah,
years. Yeah,
that's quite a commitment. So did you go from the SCLC to the federal government?
I did.
And
I
how
did.
did
When
that,
Dr.
why on earth would anybody want to work for the federal government to begin
You
with?
know, I had a cousin who had been telling me for years I should go to work for the federal government. I had no interest in going for the federal. I was a journalist, right? I wanted to be
Yeah,
independent. I wanted to.
exactly.
So when Joseph Lowry, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he led the SCLC from 1977 to 97, and he was retiring, and I could tell that the organization was not going to be the same. Clearly was not. I had my oldest son, who was 17 at the time. All of a sudden, out of the blues, he started having seizures. So the SCLC, like a lot of small organizations, then would cover the employee, but not the
Uh,
employee's family. So the medicine was so expensive. I had to go find something that would give me some insurance. And so for only the second time in my life, because back then, Tom, before in the 70s and earlier, people got jobs out of newspaper advertisements. But the
yeah.
only other time I ever got a job out of that newspaper advertisement, this white liberal nurse who was the regional director at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, she was the appointee over the 8 southeastern states in the Clinton administration. She said, she hired me because she said she wanted her office to more accurately reflect the region that we serve. So the 8 southeastern states, the most health disparities, the most poverty, the most illiteracy in a lot of ways, very rural area, not quite like the Dakotas or somewhere.
Sure.
And the deepest vestiges of Jim Crow and slavery still exist here in the Deep South because it
Mhm.
is the blackest area of the country. And so I like that. And so for me, it was still going. And in fact, so she wanted to make sure that the people we spent money with, the people we partnered with, had a table that brought allowed voices from all the communities, black,
Mhm.
brown, Asian, LGBTQ plus. That wasn't even a term back then, but
Yeah, great.
that was the thought process. And so that's when I went to work there at the federal government.
So what year was that?
That was 1998.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Um,
so it's the last 2 years of the Clinton administration.
gotcha. And you worked you didn't work in DC, did you, or did you?
No, I always worked out of Atlanta.
Okay.
We're in the 8 southeastern states. So we had the Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama. And so you
And
think
that was
about
the
the
case for
diversity.
all five for all during all five administrations.
Correct.
So you're
Correct.
not a
Now,
DC guy. You've always been an Atlanta guy,
always
basically.
been out in the, what I'd say, Tom, out in the real world.
Yeah, no
Now, I
kidding.
spent time in DC, but basically, and that's the deal because the perspective is so different from in DC.
Let's now shift back to the book, The Longest 4 Years of My Life. And so this is a nonfiction memoir, and it's a huge work. I mean, I just now counted all the citations you have, footnotes, 700 some citations from newspaper articles, speeches, articles, I guess, news releases, all kinds of stuff. And plus, your index is like, I almost fell off the amount of work that went into this is giving me a headache just thinking about it. So this must have taken you a long time to write. But the reason I'm interested in it is because I wrote the very first book I wrote was a nonfiction memoir. I came upon the things that I'm sure you came upon, which is if you're going to write nonfiction, it has to be correct. You have to cite your sources. You can't
Yeah,
just make shit up, basically. It
that's
really
right.
has to
That's
be
right.
On stuff where you might be questioned later, you need to say, check footnote number 16. That's where this came from. And then you also have, I mean, I guess I didn't think about it nearly as much as I should have, but if you're starting to use real people's names and real situations, it's like, is that really the best thing I should be doing? Because suppose somebody doesn't like the way they were depicted and they decided to sue. Fortunately, that never happened to me, but I'm sure these are all things that kind of, were front and center as you were writing this book, right?
Absolutely, and particularly um, based on a person who is at the center of that
Yeah.
book, because we know he's vindictive,
He
he's
likes to sue
punitive.
people, right?
He does, and he let 6,000 people out of jail who are, and some of them are happy to do his bidding. So there was a lot to consider here in terms of, I mean, I have people I care about, and
Sure. How far should you
so
go, right?
yeah,
That's a
exactly,
question for
exactly.
anybody who writes nonfiction. So let's just cut to the chase. The longest 4 years of my life deals with your 4 years working for the first Trump administration, but you also worked for Clinton, George W., and then Barack Obama, and then Trump, and then Joe Biden. You've got this
Right.
great photograph on your website of you and some of your associates with President Obama. That must have been a moment in your life that you'll never forget, having a picture taken with the president.
And the
Um,
first black African American president, and we had the only all black appointee staff of the 10 in the country. And the reason we got to take that picture with him, Tom, was that here again in the 8 southeastern states, we didn't enroll anybody, but we implemented his landmark legislation, the Affordable Care Act,
right.
and we coordinated the enrollment of just under 24% of the people in the entire country in 1 out of 10 regions.
Yeah, amazing. And so this was the Department of Health and Human Services that you were working for?
Correct.
And
Correct.
so is that the department you worked for the entire 25
The
years?
entire time.
Okay.
Yes.
So you got to see lots of changes and lots of different stuff. So you write with pride about for a lot of the years that you worked there. I mean, 25 years, to me, 25 years working for anybody these days, let alone the government, is like a big deal, right? Um,
Correct.
so what kept you interested all those years, especially during the 4 years? You kept engaged. You stayed all the way through the Trump years into the Biden administration. What kept you going?
So I think that there were people, in fact, people at my office that said, I can't do this. I'm out. I'm not going to stay and work
Sure.
for him.
We're
And
seeing it now, even with Trump too. A lot of people have defected.
absolutely. And so I felt like somebody needed to stay. Now I had to do my job. I had to do my very best to make the administration look good and to honor their mission. But I also felt like, for example, the Affordable Care Act was still the law of the land. And as you know, over 70 times that administration tried to replace and repeal, kill
Yeah,
the
and that's a huge
Affordable
part of your
Care.
book here, right?
It
That
is.
fighting that, swimming upstream against that.
And so some of the people, the sister community that we had spent 6 years out, laying the groundwork the first 2 years from 2010 to 2012 before the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. And then they felt abandoned, okay, because we couldn't go out and support them. We were restricted. We couldn't be out in the field like we'd been the previous 4 years. We couldn't. uh, I had a colleague who worked at CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, and they funded the Affordable Care Act. Well, they funded the navigators. They funded the people who actually, the reason the Affordable Care Act was important, or actually the assisters in particular, for highly educated people, young people who knew how to navigate a computer and everything else. Um, Signing up for the ACA for your health insurance wasn't that difficult, but for uneducated people, elderly people, it's overwhelming. It's 1,000 pages, right? So that's why those people were important. So what I did, she said, "Hey, I got 2 kids at home who like to eat." So she wouldn't even send the people out the information that was coming from her agency because she knew that the administration didn't want that to happen. So I felt like, well, I can help people from the inside. There's certain things I can't do. I couldn't hold weekly calls like we
Sure.
did, where we I would bring together people from the Administration for Children and Families, the FDA, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, HRSA, which manages all the federally qualified health centers. A lot of people don't realize 40% of all primary health care in this country is provided by the federally qualified health centers on a sliding fee scale. You make a little, you pay a little. You make
Mm.
a lot, so if you don't make any, you can get it free. So I still did what I could to help them and get them information. And so I did that under a lot of duress, but I
Well,
thought it was important.
so what you're saying is your job kind of changed from being an advocate for the government to trying to be an advocate for the individuals who you were serving.
Yeah, and I still had to do what I had to do for
Of
the
course.
government, but yes, I felt like somebody, and some people felt, some people felt that I was selling out by not leaving. But I think some people have to leave and some people have to stay. And everybody can't leave and everybody can't stay.
Well,
So
you probably
I
did a
just
huge
chose to
service to your
stay.
constituents and to those folks by staying. This reminds me of, so after I left the news business, I spent a year and a half as a public information officer for my little town here. Now, I'm not
Hmm.
going to even begin to try to compare what I did in my little 7,200 people town here in New Jersey, and I was working with a mayor and a council. We were totally aligned. I mean, we were politically, emotionally, educate, we were completely simpatico every step of the way. But having said that, I had to remind myself pretty much all the time that I represent them. I represent this government. I represent this town. I don't represent me. And, when I'm sitting in those council meetings, I'm basically reporting, but I'm working for the town. That must have been way hard for you working for in an administration run by a president who marginalized minorities, marginalized women, marginalized pretty much everybody who wasn't a white male. I mean, how the hell do you do that?
Very true. And so that did make it extremely difficult. And in fact, the first person I worked for in this administration was another nurse. In fact, she was a former congresswoman, Renee Elmers, excuse me, out of North Carolina. She was a fierce Trump attack dog. In other words, she loved the president. She loved his policies, did not like the ACA.
Mm.
But even when he appointed her, now in every other administration, I'll tell you this is an interesting contrast because, of course, I can make some working for 5 administrations,
Yeah, of
right?
course. And you worked for another Republican administration too, of course, right?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
and and that was in some ways one of the best experiences I had. But so other 10 regions, in every other administration, at least half of them were women regional directors. Most of the times it was 6 or 7 women.
Hmm.
She was the only woman hired in the Trump administration as a regional director, the appointee. In fact, she had a relationship with Tom Price, who ended up being the HHS secretary. He's also he's a congressman from Georgia. So that's how she got the job, I think. But even she said, look, we had all these years to replace and repeal the Affordable Care Act, and we didn't do it. So we should be out serving the people. She even said that as a
Yeah.
Republican who didn't support the ACA. In fact, and she didn't last long because she said that even in their meetings, the 10 of them with the higher ups at HHS, the men would shut her down. They would never listen to her. And she was the best spokesperson. Again, she was really good in front of a camera, and they wouldn't let her go out. And so it was. She said, "I don't need this," and she left. And so it was interesting in a lot of ways. And so, but I felt like I had to be part of the remnant, Tom. I had to stay inside and do what I could.
Right. And so one of the other main obstacles you dealt with was what was, in my opinion anyway, the tepid response to the COVID pandemic. Right. And I say that as somebody who at that time, I was working in the assisted living industry. So I went between the time I was in news and I was a PIO. I spent 12 years as a director of communications for an assisted living company. And the year 2020 was probably the worst year we had in the history of that company. We lost people in assisted living and nursing homes. They were ground zero. These are men and women in their
Absolutely.
80s and 90s, many of whom have pre-existing conditions. We lost 100 people in our 20 buildings, including one employee. And you talk a lot in your book. And, you basically, I was thinking about this just before we talked, because this was a horrific time for somebody who was doing communications for this industry, which both my governor and another governor were like vilifying us, like we're killing these people, right? But in the meantime, the president at the time, President Trump, he was obsessed with calling this the China virus. It's the China virus. He never even. It was like he was in denial that it even existed. It took a long time to get up to speed. He spent a lot of time
Mhm.
still vilifying Dr. Fauci and everything. And you talk
Absolutely.
about that and how. So, what was the main? What could you do at that time during COVID?
It was terrible. We dismantled the COVID task force
Right.
the playbook that Obama gave them. They said, listen, we had been game planning for COVID because, we game planned for bird flu. We gave plan for what was that when the clocks were changing, the big time. I can't remember what it was called, but we had been preparing for a pandemic and doing all kind of exercises. And so the thing to me was when we needed um, an FDR or Churchill,
Yeah.
we got a Trump, and
Yeah.
he was totally unprepared. And I mean, when we needed somebody to say, "Listen, this is the biggest issue we've come across in 100 years because that's how long it had been essentially
Sure.
since it's going to be tough. We're going to lose people. We're going to come together as a country. We're going to fight this, and we're going to put all our resources in it." As you said, he was unserious. He was in denial. It's going to disappear. Let's put bleach in our
Yeah.
vein. I mean, all this crazy stuff that and so it cost us hundreds of thousands of lives.
Totally.
And so and so it was a really tough period because initially, it was a situation that it seemed like it really hit the black and the brown communities really hard. It really ravaged the Latino communities, particularly like the farm workers. And like you said, ground zero was the nursing homes, the assisted living. Those people were already vulnerable.
Sure.
So to me, your main job is to protect people, and you didn't do that. So it was a really difficult time. So that's why I thought, and then I realized later on, the reason I was there was to document this. No, I thought we'd have a different president now, and this would all be for the history books. But I think somebody from the inside, and I don't know anybody else from the inside who has documented this, who worked in health and human services. And you think about health and human services in the last 20 years. Okay, again, seven presidents before Obama tried to implement the AC. I mean, some form of universal health care.
Sure.
He was successful. You think then COVID, and then when you think about immigration, our role in immigration, we didn't separate children from their parents at the border, but we were responsible for their care. And so one of the things our office was charged with doing was vetting and finding communities who would house these unaccompanied children.
Mm.
And so to me, which was because of the way the treatment and what I felt, and again, with us having an all black office, to me, there were so many things were too close to what I felt like were like chattel slavery and post Jim Crow era. It was just, there was so much inhumanity there that it was a really difficult time.
Yeah, I'm
But I
sure it
thought
was.
it needed to be documented. And of course, I figured I'd be in colleges and universities talking about this all over now, to public health, to history departments, social sciences, political sciences. But of course, that's not happening, right? Because DEI is
Oh man,
Not
don't
something we
don't
can
get me
talk about.
started on debt. That's another whole podcast. I mean, it's
It
I got to
is.
take a deep breath about DEI. My wife and I look at, we do a lot of eye rolling about that, and it's just let me go to my next question so that I don't
Yeah.
get derailed here. So, you started talking about documenting. So that gets to me then to the process of actually writing this book. Did you document all this stuff while you were going? Because there's so much detail in here. It almost sounds like you were taking notes and going home each night and writing this stuff down. Is that what you did, or did you just
It
rely on memory?
was.
So you
No, no,
really
I
did.
did.
You took
I
notes and you
did.
wrote while you were doing this.
I did because I knew that there was a lot of vulnerabilities if I didn't get it right and I
Mhm.
didn't get, so yeah, I kept everything. I wrote everything. I mean, I had to be like during COVID time, I'll give you this example. 2 times a day, I would be on a national call and I'd have to document. For example, I'd have to document what every mayor and congressman and city manager in my states had to say about, you know, were things open? Were the things flows? Were they getting, did they have access to vaccines or testing centers? All those kind of things. And then I'd have to go back and report it to the regional director,
Mhm.
who then, of course, reported it. So I'm doing this. So I had, and that would be twice a day. And so I'd see where the choke points were, where there were issues, where there were complaints, where they thought things were going well, and where mayors clash with governors over policy and close, don't close, and all this kind of. So yeah, that very early on I started because I could tell if this was going to be a very different, something unlike. Again, there's somebody who had worked for 3 previous presidents.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
knew what was normal, and this was none of very little of this was normal. So
So
yes, I did.
documenting it, obviously, that was like an early red flag for you. You knew you had to document the stuff as you went along. So then, how long did it take you to actually write the book? Did you write it in chunks? You know, did you go into a dark room every night at 5 p.m. and sit there for 3 hours, or how did you do it?
It was it kind of depended and it was sporadic because, for example, when Trump came in, before Trump came in, um, when Obama came, they funded another position. So instead of me having 8 states to manage, and by the way, that's the biggest region in the country. Okay. Uh, I, one person had that, my colleague had 4 and I had 4. Well, when she says, I'm out of here, I'm not going to stay.
Yeah,
Then I had 8. So my responsibility doubled. So my writing time was less because I was stretched out and doing
sure.
so many other
So it
things.
took
And then
longer than you probably
it,
wanted to.
it did. But yeah, many nights I would go home and write. And and then I'd write on the weekends, and
Hmm.
and so, but it still took a long time, and because, like as you said, um, you know, I had to get it right, and
So you retired at in 2022. Did I get that right?
right
But the
about
book
this
came
time.
out. So did you spend most of your time during retirement writing, or had you done some while you were still working and some in retirement?
Yeah, it was both. It was
Okay.
both, and then, whereas kind of like you mentioned, I probably wish I would have gone with. In some ways, I wish I would have gone with the traditional um, publishing firm, but they were telling me a year. I said a year. I don't need to wait a year on this, and it took way longer than a year because again, I got mixed up with some people who didn't
Yeah,
know what
I
they were
know.
doing,
It's a
and so
sad
yeah,
story that happens over and over again. I know.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, I got to say though that the genre of Black history, African American history, it's huge. And there are so many people who have great stories like you. You probably would have done well to maybe wait a little bit, but that's 2020 hindsight. And what the hell do I know? Because I've never done it. I've gone through that nonfiction book I told you about Move. This was in the mid 80s, right? I wrote
Hmm.
this with
Hmm.
no internet, no cell phone. I went to the library and looked up microfilm for God's sake, right? You talk to people, kids today, they look at you like you're crazy. What was that? So I did that, over a period of time, and I actually did find an agent who was interested in the book. But by that time, it was 4 years since the event. There were two other books out. The publishers who she showed it to all said, well, this is really well written, but this happened 5 years ago. Plus, we have these other books. Plus, they called it a very regional story, right? Who outside of Philadelphia is going to care about this? It turns out that many years later, a lot of people outside do care because it tells bigger
Absolutely.
stories about police
Absolutely.
overreach and how a government should be dealing with a group like this. But I said, I'm never going to do this again, and so I just decided self-publishing is the way to go. We're still supposed to get editors because, Truman Capote said everybody needs an editor. But I do my editing with an online thing. I don't use people because, I have this massive ego that doesn't take criticism well. Plus, I'm not going to
Sure.
spend $3,000 to $5,000 for some stranger to trash my work. Sorry. And that's just me. So anyway. So you mentioned earlier that when you worked for George W. Bush, in some ways, that was, and again, another Republican president, that was a positive experience. So as a black guy working for, Republicans, how was that different than working for the Trump administration?
Question. Good question. Well, for one, I think because Bush relied a lot, maybe on his father for advice, and of
Mm.
course he had what's his name, the old guy that the VP, they made the movie about, as his VP,
Oh,
who's
Cheney.
Cheney.
Yeah.
So he gave us, and this to me is part of the Republican mantra pre-Trump, gave us a lot of reign to just get the job done.
Mm.
They didn't hold us tight. We weren't tightly held. We said, you have the freedom to do this and do that. Just get the job done. So we had a lot more autonomy under
Mm.
Bush. Some of the things I liked, I mean, and I had some criticisms for every president, even Obama, right? But one of the things that he did that I really liked, he had a healthy marriage initiative, okay? Because a lot of people in inner cities and some people have never really experienced in many of their communities, many people aren't married. So he
Sure.
put money into helping people to model people for people and show people what a healthy marriage looked like. He had a grandparents raising grandchildren initiative again, and which is becoming more and more common, whether it's drugs or the criminal justice
Oh, yeah. We
system
hear about
or
that all the time.
exactly. So
Celebrities even talking about how their grandmom and their grandpop, raised them. Usually the grandmom.
yeah, so these were to me, I think that he had this point of compassion about him. No, I don't see any of that
Well, I
in
think
this
compassion
administration.
and that was kind of old style Republican, and we
That's
don't
right. That's
see
right.
we don't
That's
see
right.
old style Republican anymore,
Correct.
and it's really,
Correct.
in my town here, this is basically a Democratic town. Everybody on the council's Democrat, the mayor's Democrat, but we had bipartisan councils for many years here, and
Yeah.
we got shit done. It was not what
Right.
it's like today, where it's
Correct.
tribal and it's
Yeah.
like you're either a good guy or a bad guy. We just, we had disagreements, but political diversity is not at least in those days was not a bad thing. I always thought political diversity, like every other kind of diversity, is a healthy thing. Now it's not. It's like you have to pick a side, and the people who don't want to pick a side, they get left at the side of the road, unfortunately. So that's my little speech.
Yeah. So that was the difference. I mean, we produced a newsletter, and uh, Trump, and during the Trump administration, they micromanaged anything we did media wise. And I was the media guy, so if I couldn't set up my Um, in fact, we had a council basically of the public affairs people in all the federal government areas here in Atlanta. And so they were having a big event, and this is at a TV station, and we were all going to bring our new, because these were all new appointees in the Trump
Mm.
administration. We were all going to bring them there, going to introduce them to the media, and so they'll know who to call, and they'll say, "Oh, yeah, I met this person at that point in time." They wouldn't let myself and Renee Elmers go to this event. They kept delaying it, pausing it, and then finally they wouldn't let us go. No other administration I worked with was so, but of course, no other administration talked about alternative facts, right? And
Yeah. Why wouldn't they let you? Why wouldn't they let you go?
well, I don't. It's a mistrust. Now, listen, all of them have probably some level of mistrust because, okay, especially if a Democrat was in charge last time. But this is your appointee,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
you're not even gonna let your own appointee go to this event. So I don't know. It was that's why I said it was so different. It was so strange
yeah.
that I knew it was noteworthy.
Yeah. Well, look, congratulations on getting number one, getting through 25 years. Number two, writing this book and staying with it and giving it the detail that you have. And finally, on, retiring in one piece and moving on with life in retirement. I retired from full-time work. It's been 5 years, and it's a whole new thing, and there's a whole new life out there. I don't think I would ever go back to the news business the way it was now. It's so collapsing into itself. When you see what's happening to CBS at the hands of Paramount and Skydance, they're laying hundreds of people off. It's all
Oh, yeah,
becoming kind of one homogenous blob. And
yeah,
when you couple that with what's happened to local newspapers around the country, you
yeah.
know, we are fortunate in my town. We have a weekly newspaper. It's one newspaper. It covers 7 towns. But, my little town of Fanwood of 7,000 people, we get very little press. We get very little ink in that paper because they're trying to cover 8 towns.
So one of the things, and I'm a man of faith, so I prayed once I left federal government, I wanted to continue to do what I felt like was justice work because that's what I think I did for HHS for 25 years. I actually worked to go to church with this white architect whose company was putting in a bid to create the national monument to the 1961 Freedom Riders. You know,
Mm.
the 2 buses that left DC coming south to
Yeah.
test the new law that, and so in Anniston, Alabama, when they stopped there in Calhoun County, the bus was firebombed.
Mm.
And of course, the other bus had John Lewis on it, and they went down there and they were beaten in, you know, Montgomery, and they were beaten in Jackson. And so I finished working. I was a consultant on that as a historian and an outreach and engagement person. So it was really cool that that's kind of been my career working in that arena. So now, because we've just finished phase 1 of the project, in fact, they're going to unveil it next week over
Mm.
in Anniston. And nothing else is going to happen though, because if we're taking books out of the Smithsonian
Yeah.
and saying we
Jeez.
can't talk about Frederick Douglass, there won't
Oh,
be any
boy.
more funding for this. So, but it was been a great joy and a privilege to be able to be part of that. So I
Well,
just
maybe you'll be
wanted to
part of
share
other
that.
things like that. You certainly have
That's
knowledge
right.
and expertise, and you've got all this history at your fingertips. That's just amazing to me. It's really been a privilege to meet you and to read your book. I wish you lots of luck with it. I can't wait to see what your next project is going to be. Good luck with everything. Thank you again for being with me, Deric. I really appreciate meeting you.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate you too. Bye bye.